Picture the St. Lawrence River at 2 a.m., a corridor of glassy black water under a sliver of moonlight. There's no storm, no wind, yet in that stillness something is profoundly wrong. On May 29, 1914, the RMS Empress of Ireland slipped into this unnatural calm and never emerged whole. Within 14 terrifying minutes, over 1,000 men, women, and children were lost to the depths. How did a ship, deemed unsinkable by its owners, meet such a swift and merciless end? And why has its name been all but forgotten, overshadowed by the Titanic and Lusitania? Tonight we dive into a tragedy that drowned both lives and memory, uncovering the echoes that still haunt the river's submerged grave. On a bright spring morning, May 28, 1914, the Empress of Ireland stood regal in Quebec City's harbor. Owned by Canadian Pacific steamships, she was the transatlantic pride of a young nation, sleek, 570 feet long, with luxury suites, sumptuous dining rooms, and enough lifeboats, they claimed, for every soul on board. Nearly 1,500 passengers and crew came aboard. Immigrant families chasing new beginnings, business magnates sealed deals, and 170 members of the Salvation Army bound for a London conference. Crewmen polished brass rails. Stewards laid fine china. From first-class promenades to steerage bunks, laughter and music filled the decks. But beneath the veneer of celebration lay a drifting undercurrent of risk. Dense fog to the east, a late coal shipment, and a bold decision by Captain Henry Kendall that would seal their fate. Just past midnight, the Empress steamed downstream into a blanket of dense fog near Pointe-au-Père. Visibility dropped to mere feet. Lamps pierced the gloom like lonely beacons. Captain Kendall reduced speed and sounded the foghorn, but river currents had shifted, and his compass, unbeknownst to him, was off by several degrees. Downriver, the Norwegian collier SS Storstad pressed upstream, unaware of the Empress's precise position. Hand signals were misread, Morse clicks on the telegraph and whistle blasts tangled into fatal confusion. In those tense seconds, both ships waltzed dangerously close. The question that haunts every survivor's dream. At exactly 1:55 a.m., a catastrophic symphony erupted. Storstad's iron bow, like a steel dagger, tore a 14-foot gash into the Empress's starboard hull. Water poured in with unstoppable force, first to the lower decks, then surging to the passenger levels. Cabins became instant drowning chambers, corridors flooded in seconds, power faltered, lights flickered and died. Lifeboats, swung awkwardly by the yawning list, smashed against davits or capsized upon launch. Screams and prayers blended into a single hellish roar as decks pitched at perilous angles. In fewer minutes than some lifeboats take to lower, the Empress vanished from view, taking 1,012 lives, nearly two-thirds of those aboard. How could a ship that carried families across the ocean drown so quickly in a river? As the first pale rays of dawn seeped through the dissipating fog, the rescue began. Storstad, battered but afloat, radioed for help and hauled aboard the first survivors, some frozen, some wounded, all traumatized. Local fishing vessels and river pilots joined the effort, calling out names in the spray, dragging bodies from oily waters strewn with clothing and broken railings. On shore, relatives waited in agony at Rimouski's wharf, clutching telegrams that told of horror rather than hope. Makeshift morgues filled with rows of oak coffins. Chaplains fought back tears as they read out the names of the dead. Newspapers splashed headlines for days. But as war drums grew louder in Europe, the world's sorrow quietly shifted. Thousands lay beneath the river's silt, their stories muffled by politics, time, and the relentless current. Yet their voices still whisper from the deep, if only we dare to listen. As the river's currents calmed, governments in Canada and Britain scrambled to assign blame. A joint inquiry convened in Quebec City under spotlit gas lamps and behind hushed courtroom doors, where Captain Kendall and Storstad's master Captain Anderson traded sharp accusations. Navigational logs were unspooled, Morse code records replayed, and expert witnesses debated the fog's thickness by candlelight. Did Kendall's compass error doom the Empress, or did Anderson steam in too fast without proper blasts? Families watched from gilded galleries, clutching telegrams they barely comprehended. When the verdict finally fell, Storstad at fault for violating rules of the road, it brought cold comfort. No compensation could resurrect the lost, and questions lingered. Would justice ever quiet the river's ghosts? Or would politicized findings just add another layer of sorrow to this forgotten tragedy? Amid the dry ink of inquiry reports, there were real voices. Survivors who clawed their way from the icy river to tell harrowing tales. The young mother who strapped her infant to her chest and leaped into darkness. The Salvation Army trumpeter who struck up a hymn as deck timbers cracked. The firemen who stayed below decks to keep steam up so lights would guide others up. Their stories etched the human cost of that night. Each account wove hope and horror. Frantic prayers, floating planks turned makeshift rafts. The bite of cold water stealing breath. As survivors gathered in hospitals and makeshift shelters, they forged bonds in grief and guilt, haunted by why they lived when so many did not. Their recollections would become the threads that stitched together the Empress's true legacy. Legal battles stretched on for months, pitting families against corporations. The Canadian Pacific Railway faced hundreds of claims. Widows seeking pensions, estates demanding restitution, lawyers in pinstriped suits argued valuation of lost lives, a husband's wage, a child's future. Meanwhile, the Norwegian ship owners fought back, pointing to ridge lines of reef and blame-shifting maneuvers. Settlements arrived as small coin purses of grief, enough for a grave marker, never enough to fill a void. And when the last check was cashed, Parliament quietly revised maritime law. New fog regulations, compulsory whistle signals, stricter lifeboat drills. Yet these measures felt like razors against a tsunami, too late to save the Empress's passengers, but vital to spare others from her fate. As World War I engulfed nations weeks later, the Empress of Ireland drifted from headlines into collective amnesia. Years passed and survivors aged. Their voices grew quiet, their stories passed down in private family lore. It wasn't until the 1960s, when recreational diving blossomed, that a quiet rediscovery began. Divers stumbled upon the wreck, its decks collapsed. Her nameplate legible through coral, pianos and china still scattered like a tableau frozen in water. Museums mounted exhibitions. Tiny models of the Empress appeared in nautical displays. Memorial services re-emerged on foggy May 29th. The tragedy found new champions, historians, descendants, and deep-sea photographers eager to resurrect lost names. Today, wreaths drift on the river, and every May, townsfolk gather with lanterns to guide the dead home. The Empress of Ireland's ghost still whispers from the St. Lawrence's cold depths, reminding us that even in a familiar river, disaster can strike in mere minutes. Her story reshaped maritime law, lifeboat design, and fog navigation. Yet, it also teaches something more profound: the perishable fragility of memory. We honor her today not simply with plaques or museum artifacts, but by listening to the voices of those who survived, by heeding their warnings and cherishing every breath of calm before the voyage begins. For every hidden wreck is a library of lessons, waiting for us to turn its fragile pages. What buried truths still lie within the Empress's sunken bones? In recent decades, sonar scans and ROV cameras have peeled back layers of silt to reveal new horrors and moments of tender humanity. Remains of a first-class piano, its ivory, keys scattered, speak of last dances cut short. In steerage corridors, children's shoes lie side by side as if waiting for their owners to return. Entangled life jackets and rusted oars testify to frantic abandon, while nameplates from private cabins whisper forgotten identities. Yet the most poignant find was a leather-bound diary, its pages waterlogged but intact, telling the story of a young immigrant bride writing home of her joy, only to be interrupted by the ship's fateful lurch. Each discovery raises new questions. Who was she? Did her family ever learn her fate? And will these artifacts finally restore the Empress's rightful place in history? What happens when the descendants of the lost Empress passengers seek answers? Across Canada and Europe, family historians have tracked passenger lists to reunite photos, letters, and heirlooms with the wreck's artifacts. A Montreal librarian, great-granddaughter of a lost engineer, traced her ancestors' toolbox, and when she touched the corroded wrench displayed in a museum, she wept at the echo of his calloused hands. In Liverpool, a Salvation Army choir sang hymns at a memorial service, weaving the past into the present. These personal pilgrimages turn a forgotten statistic into flesh and blood stories of dreams set sail and hopes dashed. Each descendant asks, how do you honor lives that slipped beneath the waves so quickly? And how do you carry their memory forward? Salvaging the Empress's treasure came at a deadly cost. In the 1920s and again in the 1970s, professional divers braved toxic sediment and collapsing decks to retrieve mailbags, silverware, and the ship's telegraph machine. But the river's cold currents and hidden entrapments claimed several lives. One 1975 diver vanished into a cramped engine room, his final radio call cut off in static and terror. Others returned with decompression injuries that left them bedridden. Each salvage expedition risked repeating the Empress's tragedy, trading one danger for another. Today, the wreck is protected by law, but the stories of these salvage divers, heroes who dared the same cursed hull, remain largely untold. Why do men and women risk everything to recover what was lost, knowing the specter of death still lurks beneath the silt? How does a forgotten tragedy echo through culture? Over the past century, artists, writers, and musicians have resurrected the Empress's story. A Canadian novelist wove it into a best-selling historical thriller. Folk singers composed mournful ballads that topped Canadian charts. Filmmakers captured ghostly dives in award-winning documentaries. In theaters along the St. Lawrence, a stage play reenacts the ship's final hours. Actors' faces lit by lanterns rolling across a tilted deck set. These creative tributes transform cold history into living memory, inviting audiences to feel the rush of ocean spray, the crack of timbers, the hush of a river that holds its dead close. Yet with each retelling, the question deepens. Are we honoring the Empress's souls, or merely exercising our own fear of oblivion? More than a century after she sank, the Empress of Ireland's story still demands our attention. In an age of instant news and fleeting headlines, her tragedy reminds us that some losses quietly vanish beneath the surface until we choose to unearth them. What will you carry forward? Will you let the Empress slip once more into silence, or will you be a guardian of her legacy? As we close this journey, consider this. Every river carries its own secrets. Every wreck holds its own lesson. We invite you to share her story, visit her memorial, and listen for the echoes beneath the waves, so that the Empress's souls may finally sail on in memory, not in oblivion.
Thanks for watching. Like, share, and subscribe my channel.